Hello and welcome to this final road to Belém. My name is Andrew Petersen and I'm the CEO of the Business Council for Sustainable Development Australia. Well, after 8 webinars by BCSD Australia on what's going to happen at COP30 and what's actually happening at COP30 and what might be the results or the outcomes of what's happening at COP30, I guess we didn't expect this particular outcome. And that is that as at the time of recording, which is 7 a.m. on the eastern seaboard of Australia and about 5 p.m. in Belém, there's actually a fire in the COP30 conference site. And this has been quite dramatic. A fire apparently broke out at the venue, the convention centre and the green zone in the heart of Belém. Apparently, it's being reported by AP News that flames and heavy smoke are being seen in part of the blue zone. Now, that's the negotiations zone, near a cluster of national and thematic pavilions. Some reports are mentioning that it is the area around the China and African youth pavilions. There has been a full evacuation of the conference site, which is, as you would expect, sent tens of thousands of delegates, observers and staff into the surrounding streets and the holding areas while these fire crews respond to this incident. I've had 2 emails from people on the ground in Belém who have indicated that they're fine, which is great, but they unfortunately therefore may not be able to join us this morning from Belém to indicate what's going on at those negotiations as opposed to the fire. So what we know is there's been a full evacuation. We know that there's been no injuries reported to date, which is wonderful. We're still uncertain as to what the cause is. Early indications apparently from the Brazilian officials indicate some electrical fault or even perhaps a generator problem. That would be not unexpected given that a number of the structures that are being set up for COPs, including in Belém, are temporary, and therefore it'll be interesting to see what the formal investigation out of this tells us. But it has one really important impact, and that is on the negotiations, as you would appreciate. This incident really does hit right in the final stretch of the talks on the topics of fossil fuel transition and financing, and would necessitate forcing the suspension of the ministerial meetings while the safety checks are actually being carried out. Now, we do know that the lease in relation to the venue apparently closes out, I think, 5 p.m. Belém time tomorrow, Sydney time. So it'll be interesting to see what happens in relation to whether or not this COP goes into added time, which is a historical feature of almost every single COP that has been held over the last 30 odd years. So what I'm going to be doing is giving you a précis of what I've been hearing, what I think are some of the issues that are still on the table, and what we're hearing about those issues and whether or not they have resonance and relevance to business. And then obviously a wrap up as to what could this mean for business in this very uncertain time as to what this COP is going to be like. Obviously, in any webinar being hosted by an Australian organisation, the question of Australia's involvement in the next COP is a relevant conversation to be having. And so hopefully we will get through those particular topics and we will give you some time back at the end of the hour, as we may not be able to see or hear any of our colleagues coming out of Belém. Go figure. I'm wrong. We have one. Excellent. Wonderful to see. All right. Well, we'll come back to you, Ilona, in a few moments. But wonderful to see you. Most importantly, good to see that you're safe and well. So let's start with heading into Belém and just a reminder about what this COP was all about. In one sense, the stakes really couldn't have been higher about this COP because this was the first COP after the global stock take had confirmed that the world was not on track for 1.5 degrees Celsius under the Paris Agreement. And also the year by which countries this year were expected to actually table new or updated nationally determined contributions. In other words, their homework in relation to the future action to reduce emissions out to 2035. And it's interesting that the notation from the UN FCCC in relation to that is that it's been their reflection was that it was the highest possible ambition that was needed in light of that stock take. In other words, the delta between what was actually submitted and what was needed to be done was clearly quite large, and therefore there needed to be further work. Australia, for its part, as hopefully the audience knows, did lodge its submission, its NDC. It did it in, I think, mid-September, and it contributes to, obviously, the ambition and hopefully then the work of our implementation of that ambition out to 2035. So the COP was actually framed as the moment to pivot from diagnosis to delivery, from promise to plans. There was a lot of rhetoric in relation to what it needed to be doing. But most importantly, using what had happened, particularly out of earlier COPs, including the important work done at COP28 in Dubai on the global stock take, to actually hardwire the stronger mitigation, adaptation and finance into the next decade. So on the table were decisions on a potential for, and this came very late in the piece, and we'll talk about it in a minute, a global or at least a coordinated roadmap to transition away from fossil fuels, and so far as the Brazilians were concerned, a very emphatic statement in relation to ending deforestation, with obviously Brazil's Amazonian setting really making nature and forests politically central to these particular negotiations. Negotiations also had to really undertake the difficult task of operating or operationalization of what's called the Baku to Belém finance roadmap. This is the conversation around how you mobilize trillions of dollars in climate financing for developing countries, alongside this more predictable support for adaptation and the new loss and damage fund, which interestingly Australia will be playing a role in and contributing to. And finally, this COP was supposed to also look at, if not deal with, and finish around key Article 6 carbon market rules. And it's very exciting to see Ilona on the call, so we'll come to her very shortly. But also it is supposed to, we have not finished yet, advance the global goal on adaptation, and finally lock in this first round of transparency reports. And that's important because it's another element of the Paris Agreement to turn the rule book into something that actually shifts real economy investment this side of 2030. So we go to the COP, and at this COP, which as you appreciate is being held in Belém, in the Brazilian state of Pará, these formal negotiations were being held at the Convention and Fair Centre in Belém, and this is the first time a climate COP has actually been hosted in a major Amazonian city outside of Rio or Sao Paulo. Brazil pushed for Belém to underline the centrality of the Amazonian rainforest and the issues of deforestation and the significance of these issues to forest communities within that region. So that you saw the importance of the global fight right at your doorstep, and to remind negotiators that, in the words of the president of Brazil, that the fight was there for negotiators to understand the planet that they are fighting to protect. So we'll see if that comes about. Now, according to the provisional data that's come out from the UNFCCC, 193 countries plus the European Union registered delegations for COP30, which is virtually the full UNFCCC membership. You would appreciate that the United States is not one of those counted because it did not send a delegation, but it did have a number of subnational and business and finance representatives from other non-government organisation delegations attending. With about 56,000 delegates that were registered, COP30 has now gone down in history as the second largest COP, behind only COP28 in Dubai, which, would you believe, drew over 80,000 delegates. Brazil's had the largest delegation, about 3,800 people. Now that is massive, followed by China, Nigeria, Indonesia rather. And interestingly, Australia had 494 or has 494 delegates in its delegation on ground. Now that's not necessarily government representatives. It can include those who are in the delegation of the Australian government, which quite often includes others from civil society, business and elsewhere. A bit of fun fact, the unusually high number of virtual delegates, including myself, over 5,000 registered online and have been dipping in and out of negotiations over the last 2 weeks. Now, the challenges of staging a mega summit like this in a hot, and would you believe, flood-prone Amazonian city with limited infrastructure and the controversy that has been bubbling away at this COP in relation to the record presence of fossil fuel lobbyists. And we know this because the UN actually put in place transparency reporting requirements for delegations who go to the COP, whether they're from government or whether they're from non-state actors, as they're called. And it records that there's over 1,600 fossil fuel lobbyists actually accredited. Now, we'll see in the days to follow the significance of that in terms of the outcome, but that does actually add up to about 1 in every 25 participants. All right, so as at this morning, Sydney time, which is now roughly just after 5 p.m. Belém time, I think I'll just run through very quickly and then we'll bring in Ilona, the high points, low points, no points of where the negotiations are up to on key issues and get some reflections from those who have actually been there. As at today, Sydney, morning in Sydney, this COP is turning into a classic late COP crunch. And what I mean by that is that the president of this particular COP was very eager to see that the package, the Mutirão, was actually going to be all but concluded as at their time Wednesday. But that has not happened. And a lot of negotiation is still to be concluded. What's called bracketed text still has not yet been unbracketed. In parlance of UN, that means if it's not unbracketed, it's not yet agreed to. And of course, this fire has literally halted the negotiations at the moment. What's on the table in terms of the issues? Well, the final result, the outcome, the Mutirão or Belém package is obviously a key one, and whether it includes topics in relation to ambition, sectoral targeting, which will be interesting, and what particular issues of balance are being brought by other parties to it. Second, as I indicated earlier, the fossil fuel transition and this so-called fossil fuel roadmap, and we'll come back to that very shortly. Obviously, the financing question, the new collective quantified goal, or NCQG. You've always got to have an acronym in the UN world. This notion of its role and most importantly, how you implement and what access is given to developing countries is a very big issue in this COP. The topic of adaptation, loss and damage in forests, we've already highlighted. Article 6 in carbon markets, where there's been some movement, but there's still some persistent gridlock. Of course, the issues that never go away in these kinds of processes around process shocks and the political headwinds. And then, of course, you've got individual actions and group actions that are going on, including those of our colleagues and counterparts at the World Business Council for Sustainable Development. But why don't I bring in Ilona, who has been at the COP? I think she has returned. Hopefully, Ilona, you're safe and sound back in the land of Oz. Am I correct?
Yes, thanks, Andrew. I got back very early 2 mornings ago from Belém, but
Right.
I had a fantastic time while I was there, and still very closely sort of tracking the negotiations and my sort of Australians at COP WhatsApp notices. I woke up this morning to 90 messages about fire in the pavilion. I'm very, very concerned about that, but
Yes.
thankfully all Australians are well and accounted for as far as I can tell.
Yes. Oh, the one that triggered for me was Tom saying, "I'm safe."
Exactly. My colleague has made it out of the venue, but unfortunately can't join us this morning.
I think this will go down as another cop story. It'll have to go down in history as another cop story.
Well, I think you can add to this the fact that I think it was yesterday or the day before the Moana Pacific Pavilion was flooded due to
Ah,
heavy rain. And we've also had, other instances of flooding, heavy rain, the systems within the blue zone not working ideally in the first couple of days of the meetings.
yep.
But in all honesty, I've been to a number of COPs and the layout and organisation has actually been very good. The way in which the pavilions are set out, the ability to navigate the venue, which is sometimes one of the hardest things to do at
Oh,
COP, has been quite seamless. And the spirit and the energy and the approach that the Brazilians have taken to the COP, both in terms of the blue zone and the green zone, which is sort of bringing in inclusively all of the people from throughout sort of the Para region and including a number of Indigenous people, has been fantastic. So,
okay.
logistically a little bit challenging, but all otherwise, the Brazilians have done a great job.
All right. Well, that's interesting around the logistics look and feel because it actually looked like a very beautiful cop. One of the rare
Mm.
moments in time where you see that background of the Amazon framed in pictures of the city of Belém. Interested in getting your take on what you felt, you saw, you heard and you thought was interest or revealing, most accurately, around the negotiations. Was this a case of iterative success story, or were there some sort of lumpy breakthroughs and then two steps forward, one step back?
Look, I think at the outset, I would say have always been expecting the Brazilians to do an amazing job in terms of the diplomatic side of this COP. They're known for their excellent sort of negotiating skills and diplomatic acumen, and that's sort of played out in both the lead up to the COP and also in the COP itself. In the lead up to the COP president has been sending a series of letters to constituents, sort of setting out the framing of what Brazil is seeking to achieve at COP, setting out its priorities in terms of the action agenda, but also setting out the process by which it wants to, in making this an implementation COP, bring in the outputs and activities that would be framed in an action agenda, putting them in the context of the negotiation so that there's more of an interlinkage between what happens in the formal negotiating rooms and then what plays out on the ground in terms of the work that nation states do to implement the legal sort of framework of the Paris Agreement. And I think they've done a very good job at that. So there's sort of the two tracks, the action agenda and the formal negotiations. And what if I sort of focus on the formal negotiations, often the first thing that happens at the COP is a fight over the agenda. And then
Yes.
that can derail things for a day or two as people try and work out, can we put an issue in here in another agenda item, or do we defer it for another year? In this instance, there were four key issues that were flagged by countries as things that they wanted, or groups of countries as areas that they wanted to spend more time discussing, which weren't on the formal agenda. One is the implementation of Article 9, Paragraph 1 of the Paris Agreement. That's the article that sort of essentially requires developed countries to take the lead in providing finance to developing countries. Secondly, the issue of unilateral trade measures, and sort of that has found its a home in previous COPs, sort of through the discussions on response measures, the discussions on the Just Transition work program, but sort of some parties wanted to really focus on that issue at this COP and have a separate item on it. The issue of ambition and responding to the NDC, so responding to the synthesis report that was produced in September by the Secretariat, and looking at that ambition and implementation gap. And then fourthly, looking at the other report that was provided by the Secretariat in the lead up to COP, which is on the BTRs, or the biennial transparency reports. So those sort of what's sort of now being called the Big Four were areas that could have derailed the agenda, but what the presidency did to enable work to flow quickly was to put those together as essentially an area for presidency consultations. And so the sort of lead sort of negotiator on behalf of the presidency has been running a series of consultations on those four items with essentially the heads of all of the delegations to try and sort of, you know, hear the views of the parties, look at ways in which they can then not necessarily resolve those issues in terms of a particular program of work or outcome, but look at how they can reflect those in what will likely be some type of Mutirão cover decision, and set up a program to address those issues in negotiations going forward. But the framing of those discussions has been incredibly positive in terms of the discussions in the room, even though they're very meaty items with very divisive views. The presidency negotiators been sort of characterising this as, you know, send me your submissions, send me your love letters on these issues, and, you know, basically constantly reinforcing to the delegates that you know, it's a space to be safe, open, positive about these issues. And what we're moving towards, and it's sort of, you know, still a lot of work to be done, but is something that celebrates what we've achieved in the 10 years since the Paris Agreement, you know, particularly on the synthesis reports on the NDCs. You know, the data that's come through is showing that, you know, we're not there yet. We're not on track to 1.5, but we have bent the curve and we are coming down, and that's sort of quite significant given where we would have been if we had been on a non-NDC track. The issue of unilateral trade measures, again, you know, very controversial, but you know, there may well be some framing around how you can have a discussion or notification about those issues without prejudging the positions taken by countries in implementing those. And then finance is always a tricky one. I'm not quite sure how they're going to sort of resolve that point. But again, in the broader context of transparency, it's about being able to track what finance is direct public finance, what finance is being mobilised through the private sector, and then also, importantly, how that then links to that Baku to Belém roadmap for 1.3 trillion.
Yeah. Okay. So let's dive into a couple of those. And the one that certainly found its way onto my desk was the fossil fuel roadmap. Just to surmise, probably is the largest political fight at this COP at the moment. And interestingly, it sort of came about in a roundabout way, but now we're seeing reports that there are over 80 plus governments that are now backing the call for a roadmap. I think Carbon Brief indicated that of those 80, the percentage that actually have a large impact upon or have a presence of fossil fuel within their own emissions profile is not that significant, but the symbolism is not insignificant. The other really interesting point, and this is where we come into it, is that there was a very large business coalition led by the Women Business Coalition that issued this public statement for a fossil fuel roadmap, of which BCSD, supported by its members, has put its name to. I'm interested in understanding where you think it lies and what it looks like compared to what the language of COP28 in Dubai indicated? Because that's a transition away from. What does this do? What does this roadmap do if it comes off?
So I think that again, there's two elements to this. There's the element in the negotiations, which comes through in terms of the Just Transition work plan. And in the Just Transition work plan, sort of a couple of the key areas that are being looked at are, the transition away from fossil fuels, the scaling up of renewable energy, and also, again, unilateral trade measures. They're three of the big issues that are being discussed in that room. Separately, you have under the action agenda the Brazil roadmap to phase out fossil fuels, which we've, as you said, has got that support of more than 80 countries. That includes Germany, Denmark, the UK, countries in Africa like Kenya and Sierra Leone, but then also sort of small island states like the Marshall Islands. What I think was really significant in the context of our region is Korea made a statement a couple of days ago saying it would join that initiative, and it would phase out coal-fired generation by 2040. I mean, that has ramifications within the whole region, particularly when you think about Australia's export markets for thermal coal. So I think we are seeing sort of the Brazilian presidency coalesce on that issue. There's also a number of other issues that are sort of, going to the heart of the Brazilian presidency, which we can perhaps talk about later in the context of forests and also in the context of markets. But I think where we see sort of the fossil fuel phase out and phase down is that it is still front and center after sort of being diluted in previous COPs. It's coming back up to the fore and is a key area that the presidency will be trying to get not only the broadest possible support within the action agenda, but also looking at how they can have language in the negotiation text on the Just Transition Work Program on it as well.
Okay, let's go to another, which is I suspect your personal favourite, is Article 6, and more broadly the discussion about the establishment of and the successful operation around carbon markets. Do you want to give us a sort of a précis of where that's at, as you understand it, as at this morning, and what significance? Because the thing I've always been challenged by is, well, what does it now mean for business in Australia?
Yeah, so the Article 6 negotiations were intended to be reasonably procedural and administrative this time round. On Article 6.2, there's been a series of sort of workshops on ambition and also sort of reviewing the work that's been done to develop a whole series of supporting documents to promote implementation of the Article 6.2 mechanisms, including reviewing some of the initial reports that have been submitted by countries that are participating in that mechanism. In week one, another workshop was held around ambition, and we heard from countries about what they were doing to implement Article 6. So the first message to business is Article 6.2 is up and running, and there are examples of countries cooperating on mitigation outcomes, and indeed the first transfer of ITMOs has now taken place between, I think it was Thailand and Switzerland earlier this year. So that again, it's supposed to be a procedural sort of discussion, welcoming the work that's been done, welcoming the workshops, and then not sort of giving any substantive guidance on the rules for Article 6.2.
Yep.
There are still some issues in the meeting around essentially how the implementation is playing out and how there is capacity building and support for countries to participate in 6.2. And as always, there will be, some trigger points, and the negotiations are still ongoing because there are different views around how far any guidance can go on some of these issues. But I wouldn't worry too much about that one as being, a real sticking point for the negotiations or anything that will derail the process. 6.4, again, procedural. The Supervisory Committee for the Paris Agreement crediting mechanism has been doing its work throughout the year to develop standards, methodologies, guidance. Some of that has been quite controversial, and indeed the supervisory body adopted some methodological guidance on issues relating to permanence just a couple of months ago, which has caused quite a bit of ruction amongst particularly the community, well, the cross-sector of people participating in the Paris Agreement mechanism, from both the business and the NGO side, all collectively saying some of this guidance isn't going to work for nature-based solutions. And so
right, yes.
because the approach to permanence is incredibly stringent. And so there's been a lot of pushback in terms of how that's reflected. It's not for the parties to be giving the supervisory committee, to rewrite the standards that have been adopted by the supervisory committee, but there has been sort of discussion in accepting the report of the committee. Questions around how much do the parties micromanage the supervisory committee, but also how do you avoid the supervisory committee overstepping its mandate in terms of adopting particular approaches and standards. So there's a bit of friction in that room. Again, I think where we'll land is that the report of the committee will be accepted and welcomed, and then there will be further guidance on how to ensure that they stick to their knitting. The other issue, which I think is relevant to markets, is the phase out of the clean development mechanism under the Kyoto Protocol. It was always expected that the Paris
CDM was back. I thought,
CDM's still there.
I haven't heard it for such a little while. And there it was. I'm thinking, hi, baby, you're back.
Yeah, it's not. It's on the way out. It's very much. So the issue with the CDM is setting some clear timelines and dates for the last crediting of projects under the CDM to enable the CDM to effectively shut down, and then everything moves across to the Paris Agreement crediting mechanism. I think we've landed on dates for the shutdown. So there's a couple of dates in the draft decision text that effectively close the CDM down by the end of next year. What is controversial, and this goes across all of the discussions under Article 6 and the mechanisms, is the CDM has a trust fund which has accumulated a significant amount of money over the last sort of 20 years of its operation. And on the flip side, the secretariat, and in particular the sort of parts of the secretariat that support the mechanisms for Article 6 are very, very sort of cash strapped. And indeed, you're hearing in negotiating rooms, we only have 2 more weeks left of funding to continue the work of the supervisory body, for example.
Wow.
So there is this question of where does the CDM money go to support, and does it go back to 6.4? At the moment, there's placeholders for some, an amount to manage the close down of the CDM, but also money to the adaptation fund, money for capacity building for Article 6.2, and then money for Article 6.4. So that issue of where the money goes is probably the most interesting one in the markets discussion at the moment, because the 6.4 entities will need significant resources to scale up to be able to support the deployment of the architecture and infrastructure for markets going forward. So that's sort of where we're at with markets. The other thing in the action agenda is again another presidency initiative to coalesce countries around high integrity carbon markets. And again, that was something that was supported by countries like sort of Singapore, Germany, the presidency, of course, the UK. And we asked in one of the briefings with the Australian delegation whether they would sort of support that. And it's the feedback was we're considering the various presidency initiatives, but we haven't signed on to that one yet. But in any event, I think it's another presidency priority is trying to sort of get greater harmonization and higher standards across global carbon markets, which is, I think, a good initiative and something that we should be thinking about how Australia engages with.
Yeah, and just to give a little bit of personal flavour to that, correct me if I'm wrong, but we have one of our delegation from government actually being one of the
Mm.
co-facilitators of that particular negotiation
Yeah,
on Article
absolutely.
6.
Yeah.
And it's probably helpful for Australians who don't go to these COPs to understand how involved our uh, government is involved in the process. We see a lot of Peter Bowen, Chris Bowen rather, in his very snazzy looking casual attire, but the other work that is going on by representatives of our government in a number of different quarters is very true to see on a regular basis, of which Article 6 is just one of those examples. Looking in and dialing in and seeing them either live or on photographs that come through. Let's talk about the wood for the trees and the issue of deforestation and the enormous conversation that was being held by the Brazilian government around the support for the Amazon. Be really interested to hear your take on how that impacted these negotiations. This was obviously a pet project of the government, definitely of its president, of the country, and played a key role in the presidency of the Brazilian government in running these particular negotiations. But give us a feel of how that played out during the course of the negotiations. There was a very large announcement around a facility. You had Northern Hemisphere governments lining up to support, and then some didn't. What was your take, and what do we learn from that, particularly as we are going to play a role in the next COP, and we'll come to that shortly? And are there sort of life lessons that we can take around how the establishment of facilities can be set up to support Indigenous communities and, as you said earlier, nature-based solutions?
Yeah, so the announcement around the Tropical Forest Forever Fund, the
Forever,
TFFF.
yeah. I knew it was T
So
triple F. I didn't know what the
yeah,
other F stood for. Yeah.
yeah. So that's been a work in progress that the Brazilian government has been, looking to coalesce support around and working with groups, including, WWF, for months leading up to the COP, and it was one of the first announceables at the leaders summit, sort of before the COP
Yeah.
officially commenced. What they are looking to do is to raise by the end of 2026, I think $25 billion of investment to then essentially draw in another sort of 100 odd billion of investment from other sources to protect tropical forests throughout the world. It is an investment fund, so the expectation is that if countries are putting into the fund, there will be a level of return on investment. So, what that actually means, I think, is more around how the money is invested and then used to support forest communities and forest areas to maintain them intact or to support restoration activities. At the outset, I think we're up to close to 10 billion now. The Germans initially didn't put in, but they have now come in. And I don't think Australia itself has committed funding to the facility yet.
Not aware of that.
But interestingly, Twiggy Forrest, put 15 million in.
God love him.
When he was here earlier in the first week of the negotiations. So I think it's a signature initiative. Each COP has signature financing initiatives where funds are raised, and then sometimes they go on and you see the results. Other times there's announceable facilities, and you sometimes have to look under piles of books to find whatever happened to, in my instance, we worked on a fund called Insecure Resilience back in 2017, and I'm not quite sure where that 150 million pledged ever really materialized, but I'm sure there is still work on that. So this is a large scale facility. It's going to be sort of managed at the highest levels as an investment facility, and we'll see how that then supports protecting tropical forests, which are the lungs of the planet, and support not just the emission reductions and sequestration, but also broader co-benefits for communities and for the environment.
Yeah. Okay.
So in terms of lessons learned from
Yeah.
that, I think working very early to bring in support for those types of facilities, so you can have the announceable investments, come through. So, it's not just announcing a fund, but it's announcing a fund and saying we have got all of this investment coming in that's committed by these countries. So that's, important in the lead up, is that diplomacy to, get those commitments. What Australia has said as part of its a revised approach to COP31 is that in looking to have a major event hosted in the Pacific, they'll be looking to use that as a way to capitalise the Pacific Resilience Facility. That's a new international organisation that's been set up to achieve $500 million in the first instance for adaptation and resilience in the Pacific, and they're looking to raise that money by the end of 2026, with a view of 1.5 billion for the 1.5 degree goal.
Yeah, right.
And Australia's really getting behind that. It's already put in 100 million, and we're looking to sort of scale investment in the PRF going forward. So that will be one of the signature financing initiatives. But it sort of shows us, a stark difference between the finance that's available for adaptation, and the Pacific is trying to raise 500 to 1.5 billion. Forests, we're looking at 25 billion plus. Yeah. And somehow I feel like we need to still, and part of the negotiations is very much focused on doing more around adaptation finance.
Yeah, I would love to talk further about that. I just don't think we've got the time. But yes, that's something to talk about and build into what's going to happen next year. Let me give you some guidance as to the remaining time that we have together. I'd really like to hear your thoughts on non-state actors. We know that the United States wasn't there, but Gavin Newsom, Governor of California, was all over the Australian press while he was there. And from my part, the feed coming through was that this was very much a Indigenous peoples and communities present COP, and that there were significant debates and discussions on gender. And then, of course, with your colleague, Tom Webb, there as well, the conversation about the role of youth. I think that it'd be interesting for an audience to understand what role do they play in a COP, and what did you notice and or hear about their role at this particular COP?
Look, at this particular COP, I think there's been an elevated role for all of the external stakeholders, or the non-state actors. In particular, the presidency has had special envoys focusing on each of those areas, with a very strong focus on the role of Indigenous peoples and local community. There's been the space for participation in the green zone. There's been the space for having the very large march that we had on Sunday to recognise issues across a range of different stakeholder issues and concerns with respect to climate. And we also had demonstrations from peoples coming out of the Parastate and the Amazon to
I
raise
love the
concerns
demonstrations. I love them.
Yeah.
It adds colour to the whole thing.
It's fantastic to see people there, but also to see that they're not getting shut down by the Brazilian government. They're being embraced to be able to have that voice, even if that voice is perhaps not as strong and clear within the blue zone.
Yeah. Okay.
In the Australian Pavilion, there's a large space for the voices of our traditional owners and Aboriginal peoples to showcase the work that they've been doing on climate, traditional knowledge, great. And I've sat in on and participated in a series of side events, all which highlight the role of traditional owner communities in implementing, actions for mitigation and adaptation and resilience. In the context of renewable energy, in the context of nature repair. Certainly in the Australian Pavilion, a very strong voice and presence from local communities.
Okay.
Gender always has a very prominent role across the COP. Perhaps less so in the blue zone, at least from my perspective in the events that I was following. But again, it is quite pervasive in the negotiations around ensuring that equitable and inclusive participation in the negotiations. And then in terms of youth, again, probably fewer youth than we would have expected at a COP otherwise, just because of the challenges of getting to somewhere like Belém and being resourced and financed to get there. But again, the Australian delegation has its youth ambassadors, of which my colleague Tom is one. They were certainly, again, well represented in side events throughout. But the presidency had very actively sought out the views of all of these different sort of stakeholder communities to inform a lot of the work that it's doing in the action agenda.
Okay, that's very encouraging to hear. Let's wrap up with two components. The first is, what does this all mean for business? And then, of course, the conversation we have to have is, well, what did we just get for COP31? But we'll park that one for a moment. Let's go to the question about what does this mean for Australian business. I guess what are you thinking about writing in your newsletter, which we will circulate, your blog, your thoughts to the business community and to your clients in particular over the next couple of days about what they have to take away from this particular COP? If it's true that the message is move from pledge to or promise to actually doing something, actually on ground and implementation, what signals does this COP give that you would be able to say are reinforced by you now taking action? And anything else that you see that is obviously relevant to share with a business audience?
A couple of things that I think until we see the final decisions, it's difficult to
hard to say.
But I think the focus on implementation and showing that the next round of NDCs have to have clear, action plans linked to them. We've seen Australia sort of put forward its effort with the net zero plan and the sectoral plans, and then also the investment plan that sits behind it. I think what we will expect to see in Australia, but also across other countries, is countries sort of translating their targets into these planning instruments, which then enable business to move forward with sort of greater policy certainty around, what and how we must do to move towards 1.5 degrees. I think there's a recognition that we will overshoot. So, there is that concern around how do we bring us back faster. And I think there's going to be, perhaps some policy decisions that will, put pressure on business to do more in terms of direct decarbonisation. And that may well come through in the Australian context through the review of the safeguard mechanism, but also looking at how our next NDC is translated into other sectors. Another area that's going to be a big focus for business is the just transition approach, and in particular looking at what any guidance means around that transition with respect to fossil fuels, and also the approach taken around trade measures, because even the EU is not going to move away from their CBAM, but Australia is contemplating its own measures for the cement sector. That will be interesting to watch how that plays out as well.
And Minister Farrell was meeting his counterpart from the EU in relation to the EU-AU free trade agreement last week. So it's a live discussion, no doubt.
So I think the message for business is that there's still a very strong global multilateral commitment to the Paris Agreement, that we will be sort of seeing governments across the world implementing policies and measures that will be, moving towards that Paris goal alignment, which means that there is work to be done to align business with those goals and ensure that business is also, tracking towards a well below 2-degree world.
Mm-hmm. Let's talk the topic du jour, which is COP31. And unless you were living under a rock that was on the moon and it was on the far side, you couldn't have helped but hear that Australia didn't get the COP, but it kind of got something from the COP. And it was interesting to see that first blush of commentary about it. It was the announcement being that it is a Turkey-Australia combined COP, and I'm paraphrasing there. I don't think that's the exact language, but the comment was, I think, from the representative of the German delegation, that this was a unique event. And what's interesting about that is, and you know as well as I do, that this kind of working together has happened in the past. It's not rare. It is rare, but it's not necessarily unique. I'm interested in your thoughts as to what role our minister, who will be at the COP president, I'm not sure if he's the COP president at the time of the actual COP, but what's your take on what you heard? And for the benefit of the audience, the BCSD has already been talking about this. Our colleagues in Turkey, along with the WBCSD, we're already planning how we're going to be in tripartite relations for the success of this COP in 2026. But I'm very interested to hear how you think it's going to work.
Look, I honestly have no idea how it's going to work. I mean, I was involved in the COP23, which was the host and the presidency was the government of Fiji, but because they didn't have the capacity, it was held in the actual meeting was held in Germany because of the need to be able to have a venue and infrastructure to support 30-odd thousand people coming in. We've had similar experiences with the biodiversity COP, where China was the host. So the Kunming-Montreal biodiversity framework comes from that joint approach. But usually the approach is that the presidency rests with one country and the physical hosting is with the seat. And it's done by the seat of the convention, which is the default sort of fallback if there isn't a country that's able to actually physically host. Here we have two countries that are not the fallback, which would have otherwise been Bonn in Germany. And we're looking at how they share responsibility for hosting, which is something that we have not seen in the UNFCCC process or any of the other multilateral processes. So how that works, and then also brings in the Pacific with the context of potentially having either a leaders or a pre-COP meeting in the Pacific, really doesn't quite, it's uncharted territory, and it'll be interesting to see how that actually plays out. I mean, obviously the physical event and the hosting in Antalya will be, something that Turkey will be responsible for all of that, including, no doubt the costs of, putting that on. But then the responsibility for the negotiations, I mean, the responsibility for the negotiations enables the presidency to set that agenda, like the action agenda, and which is a great opportunity for Australia to do that. But it is still quite incongruous trying to manage that process with, hosting in. Just
that Bowen's going to have to be sensitive of the Turkian government and for that matter, its people wanting to see a successful outcome for Turkey as well. Yeah, no, it'll be fascinating to watch, no doubt. Yes, not quite sure how we deal with that, but we do know that the Premier of South Australia is immensely unhappy as a result of it, and blames this, what was it, absolute catastrophe of a decision-making process. And I thought, well, yes, but it's like that reference to democracy. It might be the worst, but after you've tried everything else, it's the one you come back to, basically. Final thoughts. You've been to many of these, and I'm not going to ask you to rate scale 1 to 10 because that's just reductive. But in your mind, how will you remember this COP?
I will remember it as really vibrant and a really enjoyable experience, albeit a little bit chaotic. And a bit and
Kind
an
of sums up
adventure.
Brazil, doesn't it?
Yeah, I think I would call it probably my most adventurous COP.
Oh,
I mean,
okay.
in the sense of, just the quite crazy route to get there, on the ground. You're very much in and amongst the community. It's not where you're sort of sterilized and staying in a hotel
Yeah,
and going from
right.
the hotel to the COP venue. Where most people were staying in Airbnb apartments hosted by lovely Brazilian families.
Oh, wow.
You really got into the feeling of being part of the city of Belém.
Yeah, right.
We had a great experience where one of the fathers of the hosts of an apartment took us out into the up to the river mouth for the Amazon.
Oh,
I mean, it just
wow.
incredibly lovely, generous people in Belém, who really wanted to showcase their part of the world. So in
That's
that respect,
amazing.
it was, quite different to Sharm el-Sheikh, which is,
Mm.
again, resort hotels going backwards and
Oh,
forwards to the venue.
yeah.
This was, yeah, as I said, quite adventurous and lots of fun.
So for all of its challenges at the beginning, um, the result sounds like a people's COP that
Mhm.
actually could be an interesting model for the future.
Yeah.
You embed a COP into a community rather than having an external or sterile thing just landing somewhere
Mhm.
and not engaging with its surrounds. Yeah, it'll be
Mhm.
interesting to see how that works elsewhere. Well, look, thank you so much for joining us.
Mhm.
Great to see that you're back,
Yeah.
safe and sound. To you and yours, and also to all of those at Gilbert and Tobin, wishing you all a safe and happy Christmas and prosperous new year. That is true also of this organisation. We wish you all the best. This is the last formal event that we are hosting for this year. For those of you who receive Insider, don't be worried, you'll still get it up until the end of November. Of course, ESG Snapshot will continue until the middle of December. So you'll be able to get all of your important intel as to what's going on in the post-COP process and elsewhere, and particularly what's going to happen in the next few days, the next week rather, in relation to Australia's national environmental protection legislation. These things are yet to be determined. A recording of this will be put up on our YouTube channel and will be circulated as per usual with our members through the newsletters. And I think we will be putting out the last one also on LinkedIn if you don't get our newsletter. If you are interested in membership and haven't thought yet about joining, well, you can now just go onto our website and information and details are available for you to check out there. But for now, thank you so much for joining us. I'm Andrew Petersen, and take care and very much look forward to seeing you somewhere in the future. Bye for now.